Okay, so hello and good afternoon, everyone. For those who I have not had the pleasure of meeting, I am Lori Jacobs, the Director of Public Relations here at Delaware State Housing Authority. I see that there are a few community members and partners with us here today. We welcome you and we hope that you can glean as much as you can from this presentation. But please keep in mind that the slides were created for DEHAP participating landlords. And we do look forward to hosting more webinars and sharing additional information specifically for program participants and partners in the future. As I mentioned, my name is Lori Jacobs, and I'm joined here by members of the lovely DEHAP team, who you will hear from in the next hour. Out of respect for your time, I'm just going to go briefly over some housekeeping items. Everyone has been muted for this presentation. However, we invite your questions and comments through the chat and Q&A box. They will be answered throughout the presentation as well as at the end during the question and answer period. If we do not get to your question this afternoon, or you have specific questions to an individual situation, scenario, or case, we'll be sending out a follow-up email that will capture the Q&A and provide responses and/or referrals as needed. Please keep in mind that this presentation is being recorded. Please be respectful and considerate of others on the webinar with you while providing comments. The recording, as well as the PowerPoint presentation we will go through today, will be shared in the previously mentioned follow-up email, as well as on the agency's COVID-19 resource website, which is decovidhousinghelp.com. By the end of this presentation, we truly hope that you feel empowered and knowledgeable about the DEHAP program and processes. Today's agenda will include a brief update on the program, as well as recommended tips and tricks for landlords and ample time for question and answer. At this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Marva and Marlena to discuss DEHAP processes and recent updates. It is all yours, team. Oh, no. 1 second, Marlena.
All right. Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. I wasn't able to unmute myself there for a minute. I will start with a little bit of overview about the program as a whole, and Marva will talk some more detail about some of the required documents and processes and some of the tips and tricks for applications and working with the program. But by way of overview, if you are new to it or haven't worked with the program before, the Delaware Housing Assistance Program, we actually started in March of 2020 in a really early version of the program to provide rental and utility assistance for renters who were impacted by the pandemic, especially in those very early times when there were significant shutdowns and layoffs. And that program operated through the end of 2020. And then there was some new federal funding to create programs like that across the country. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and a kind of third version of the program launched with those much more significant resources in early 2021. Marva will talk a little bit more about eligibility in detail, but overall, we're looking to assist renters who have been impacted by the pandemic in some way, have some sort of financial hardship related to the pandemic, unpaid leave, layoff, maybe folks who have had to quarantine and not been able to work, reduced hours, and it can also be things like increased costs for childcare or not able to work because they're high risk. There's a lot of scenarios that can fit there. The program can cover late rent and forward rent, up to 3 months at a time forward. It can pay security deposits. It can also assist with utilities that are due to the landlord, as well as utilities that are due to the utility company, kind of both scenarios. It can also cover late fees for the period where late fees have been allowed. There was a period of time where late fees were not allowed under the state of emergency. That was pretty far back now, so that doesn't still come up too often, but late fees and court fees can also be covered. The program maximum, it can cover up to $2,000 per month, up to 18 months. And so the 18 months is a federal maximum, can't go beyond that. And like I said, can only pay forward rent 3 months at a time. And the 18 months can be kind of any combination of past due rent, current rent, and future rent. So if someone is applying now and they're only past due 1 month, that kind of 18 months starts there. Some folks may come in and be be past due like 10 months. And so in that case, kind of 10 comes off and then can work forward until they get to the 18-month maximum, and can also cover a maximum of up to $1,500 per month in utilities. So since that March of 2020, DHAP has distributed close to $80 million in rental and utility assistance. And that is actually, I think I said 2020, since 2021, from the very beginning of the program, it's around 95 million. But through those federal resources, we've distributed about $80 million of assistance, which is significant. I think significant for Delaware. Typically, we are distributing about 1 to 2 million, 1.5 to 2 million a week in assistance that we're getting out the door. As a whole, I know a common question we get is kind of how long will the program last? How many resources are there? There are several buckets of federal funding that kind of we're managing here. One of them expires pretty soon, but there's another one after that that has a longer time frame. However, the we will need to be making some program changes in the next probably several months. And so we're starting to kind of mention that, put some word out about that now, probably looking at some of the eligibility and maybe the maximum months that are available. So there is no end date. There is no immediate end date to the program. There's not a date where we're going to stop taking applications. I know also many of you may have applicants who have reached the maximum of 18 months, and we're making sure to communicate that to them as well. And I think from here, I think Marva's going to pick up with some more detail about eligibility and how the program works.
All right, thank you everybody for attending today. So I'm going to kind of just quickly go over the process, and some of the last screens that we'll review are going to give you some tips and tricks. So I'll get more into detail on what's required and how to make sure that your applications are being submitted in the best way possible to get approval on the first go around. So the eligibility requirements for tenants were 80% median income program. In the last, I'd say 2 to 3 months, HUD increased the eligibility for 80% median income. So there was a significant increase in the income eligibility. So potentially you may have had tenants that applied and may have been denied because they were over income, but I would have those tenants go back in and look at our website. And on this screen, you'll see what the eligibility is, but I'd have them double check to see if now they are eligible because they meet the income requirements. So, next slide. So the application process can be done by one or two methods. It can be submitted by the tenant, or it can be submitted by the landlord. Either way, if a landlord is submitting the application, we have to have the tenant interact with us. We have to have the tenant upload documents. So this program is really based on tenant and landlord participation. So initially, an application will get submitted by either the tenant and the landlord. Once both of the tenant and the landlord have uploaded or submitted the application is sent for review. We have a two-part review process. The first review is done by an auditor, and the secondary review is done by a supervisor, so that we have checks and balances in place to make sure that everything is where it needs to be and that we have everything that we need. And once that final review is done by a supervisor, the application can be either approved or denied. And we'll get into what those mean a little bit further into this presentation. So what does the landlord need? So there's some documents that we're going to need for each case that you submit as a landlord, or if a tenant submits a case and you get an email and that says, hey, your tenant has applied for the DEHAP rental assistance program. And these are the key documents. So your W-9 form. So just a little hint for you so that you know the W-9 form needs to match the parcel search. So for our larger landlords that have apartment communities, those are things that we understand. We're not looking at a parcel search because we're probably not receiving a W-9 that has a social security number on it. So if you're a property manager or something of that nature, we're going to need to see a property management agreement. But whatever is on that W-9 is going to have to match that parcel search. We're going to need your direct deposit information. So you have two options on getting paid. You can get paid via direct deposit, or you can get paid via a check. Our checks are mailed from Texas. So if you choose the check option, you could be looking at extended time for you to receive payment. If you choose the direct deposit via ACH, then your payment can be directly deposited, typically within 7 days after approval. We're going to need some general information regarding the property. It's all fill-in information, and we're going to need a rent ledger. One of the things I want to give you some clarity on is that somebody may reach out to you and ask for a past due rent ledger. If you have a tenant that is not past due, it's basically the same thing. We just need a rent ledger that basically is showing that they've paid rent and that there's a zero balance. So past due statements and rent ledgers are similar, but you may provide one or the other. All right, so what does the tenant need? So the tenant's going to need some photo ID. They're going to need income documents. So there's a whole list of income documents that we can and will accept. The easiest thing for your tenant to do is to look on the document screen. They'll see a hyperlink for an income attestation form. They can open up that form, they can complete it, and then they can type into it their name and submit that. That's the easiest thing most often for a tenant to do instead of looking for award letters or 30 days proof of income. So we recommend that the tenant does that. And they're going to need their rental documents. So what we need from them is a copy of their lease. So some of the issues that are common amongst our tenants is that when they get towards the end of the application, they don't click on the submit button. If you have a tenant, you may want to ask them, have they submitted the application in full? They can contact the call center. That's a simple call to the call center. The call center can take a look and determine whether they submitted it. Sometimes they miss that button. We find quite often when people are using their cell phones, the screens are much smaller, so they're not scrolling down and seeing the entire application. One of the other things, they may not have included all the household members on the application. So all adults on that lease must be on the application, and we're going to need income documentation for the adults that are in that household. One of the other things, not including all required documents. So quite often we'll have a tenant that may not submit one or more documents, and that's going to hold up that case from getting approved. The address on their ID does not match the property. We're going to need other proof of residence. So we're going to need a utility bill or some sort of other formal mail that shows that tenant's name and the property address. So the landlord issues that we come upon that sometimes slow down the approval process. Again, not fully submitting the application. When you go through, and we're going to look at a screenshot a little bit later on that kind of shows you the tabs in the portal. Sometimes the landlord may not get to the end of the application process and hit the submit button. Not updating the ledger on recertifications. So I'll talk about this a little bit later in more detail, but when tenants are doing recertifications, a lot of the documents will carry over from the last application. And what's carrying over are the older documents. So it will show that there is a document there, but it's not the correct document. We need the most updated rent ledger so that you can get paid everything that's owed to you. Not getting linked to the tenant application, that's a big one. So Conversations with your tenants should be centered around when they're going to use the DEHAP program. You want to make sure that that tenant has your email address, your name, the property name, and that it matches what you have. If you already have existing cases in the portal, you want to make sure that everything matches, all right? We have tenants that submit applications because they walked into the rental office and they spoke to somebody and they picked up a card, and that may not be the person in your office that's managing your DEHAP applications. So that is super important. Ledger detail, not very common, but we want to make sure that your ledgers are clear and concise and easy for our auditors and supervisors to read. And the ledger needs to be detailed by month. So I can't accept just a letter that says my tenant is $8,000 past due. It needs to be a letter. And if their rent is $1,000 a month and they're 8 months past due, then I need the month and what is due for that month. The W-9 and EIN number not validating. This doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. And if it's not validating, that's an issue that internally we can fix if you're not able to. But most often it's because when you're putting the EIN number, it's not registering with the IRS because that's not how that company or that entity was submitted to the IRS. So if you miss a comma or a period, or if you have, if you spell out the name on when you submitted it to the IRS, but you abbreviated it in your application, then it's going to get kicked back. And the owner name on the property tab must exactly match IRS and W-9. So again, back to the IRS and W-9 forms, your parcel search, owner of record, W-9, all of those things need to match. So where can my tenant go for questions? So everybody pretty much knows the portal. So the DECOVIDHousingHelp.com, that's our website, and that's going to give landlords and tenants some really great information on how to work through the application. The other thing they can do is reach out to the call center at our 866-935-0407 number. That's our general call center number, and they're able to enter or answer basic questions that the landlord or tenant might have. And we've also started working with some really great community navigators. So these are organizations throughout the state of Delaware. They're in Newcastle, Sussex, and Kent County. And these navigators are able to work one-on-one and hand in hand with your client or your tenant. Some of them will go to where the tenant lives. Some of them, the tenant can go into their office. Some of them are able to assist and do things, remotely with them. So whatever it takes for that tenant to get the help, these community navigators are there to help them. If you go to our website, you'll be able to see a link that will give you a listing of all of those navigators. I have conversations with landlords sometimes, and I say, instead of frustrating yourself and working with that tenant and sitting down and trying to do everything with them, there's this great service. The community navigators, this is what they do, and this is what they are trained to do. So I would utilize those navigators as much as possible. They do have translation services. So if you have somebody that needs a little bit more assistance because there may be a language barrier, we have translation services. And like I said, those in-person and virtual assistants that are offered by the navigators have been invaluable to many of the tenants that we've worked with. So here's the application tips and tricks. So some of these we went over, but as a landlord, I understand that your goal is to get payments processed as quickly as possible. And as I said, applications go through two reviews or two reviewers, right? So you could have an application that gets reviewed by an auditor, and on that first go round, that application can be approved. And then it goes right to a supervisor. And once the supervisor gets it in his queue and it comes up for review, then the supervisor can go in, double check everything and approve that application for payment. These are some of the tips that we're giving you that will ensure or at least help to get those applications approved on your first go around. So for your new applicants, there's an income document. I spoke about it a little while ago. We refer to it as the IAF form. It's the income attestation form. And that's the self-certification that the tenant fills out that says, this is what my income is. It's the easiest way for us to see the income. We have tenants that will upload one pay stub. We need 30 days proof of income. So instead of them trying to find 30 days worth of pay stubs, they can just fill this form out. We have landlords that have these documents, and they send them to their tenants in case their tenant doesn't have or can't access it on their own. There is a COVID hardship form. As a landlord, if you want to have a conversation with your tenant and say, look, there's two forms that I know that you're going to need. One's the income attestation form. Did you do that? The other one's the COVID hardship form. Did you open it up and make sure that sections A and B and signatures are on that form? Often, again, what happens is that when a tenant is rushing through getting the application done, they open up the form. Sometimes they sign it, sometimes they don't, but they don't notice that there's boxes with questions they have to check off. And so that case is going to get put on hold because the tenant has to go back in and complete that. So that's two of the major things that we usually run into issues with. The other one we talked about was photo ID. So we need photo ID for every person that submits the application. And that photo ID, the address needs to match the property that they're living in. If it does not, then they need to upload a utility bill or a piece of official mail with that photo ID. Instead of us going back and asking for it, if they do that in the beginning, then that box gets checked off, and then we can move through to the next portion of the application. And again, that rent ledger on the landlord side is super important. Even if, and I always say, sometimes like a letter of explanation for anything that maybe that you may or may not have is helpful. If you have a tenant that is not delinquent in rent, you can upload a ledger and you can upload a letter that says, as of, July 1st, this tenant is up to date in rent. All right. So for our recertifications, again, these are recerts. We pay in 90 or 3-month increments, 90 days. So every 3 months, the tenant can reapply for assistance. And the things that we're going to look at, so when they go in and recert, they're going to recertify, and most often all of their documents move over from the last application. And so we're going to need some of those documents to be updated. Again, the major one is going to be that income form. So if you have somebody doing a recert, make sure you say to them, hey, did you make sure you submitted the new income form? We're going to need a new rent ledger from you. Even if we've paid rent previously to you, some of our landlords have bills that may have accrued in the last period, like if you're charging for water and we're able to pay that because it's in the lease that we can pay, or that the tenant pays for water and pays you directly. If there's other fees that they pay that accumulate after we paid the last one, we're going to want to see those in the ledger. The updated utility bill. So we'll get a recertification that comes through and everything looks fine on the rent ledger side and on the income attestation side, but the tenant's forgotten to give us a new utility bill and they're asking for us to pay their utilities. And so we now have to wait until they find their new utility bill. So make sure that if they're asking for the utilities, that they submit the new utility bill on their recertification. And then the occupants. So we have a new form. So this is for new, mostly for recertifications, but it can be for new applications as well. We have an occupant attestation form. So we realize that there are times that you're going to have a tenant that may need a cosigner, or they may have had an occupant that's moved out of the home. Instead of having to chase that person down and get their income forms, we've created a form that they can complete that says that this person no longer lives in the home. So I'm not sure if all of you know, but we do pay security deposit. So if you have a person that comes in and they'd like to use the program for security deposit and rent, you can submit the application as a security deposit case. One of the questions that we've had is, hey, I haven't signed a lease yet with this person because obviously I haven't gotten the security deposit. So in place of that lease, you can upload the welcome letter. In that welcome letter, what we're going to want to see is the tenant's name, the property address, how much that security deposit is, and how much the rent's going to be, and what their move-in date's going to be. Because if they're going to move in the later part of the month, then it would be a prorated amount that we would be able to pay for that month. We're going to need your landlord information in there, a contact information for you, and the tenant contact information. So we need to make sure that that tenant that's submitting that application has your correct information. Again, for security deposit cases, if you have somebody new that's walking into your office and they picked up, maybe a card that's on the desk, they may put the wrong email address in for their application because that's not the person in your office or your organization that's approving those applications. So those are really important things that we would need to be able to get these done really quickly so that you can get that security deposit and that future rent paid prior to your tenant moving in. And regarding the ledger, there is a spot for a ledger just to avoid any sort of confusion and to make sure that, these applications get approved right away. My recommendation is that you just put a letter where upload a letter where it says ledger and say that this is a security deposit, new tenant move in. So statuses. Let me go through some of these statuses with you. So approved for payment basically means that your case has been approved. And as I discussed earlier, there's two methods of being approved or paid, I'm sorry. Direct deposit, which is the ACH, and then by check. It can take up to 2 weeks if you've chosen the check, because that does have to get mailed out. Um, and once we approve it, it will go into a paid status. And that means that it's been sent to the bank and it will clear the bank. And this will prompt an email to you kind of with details of how much the payment's going to be. A denied case means denied. There's nothing else we can do with this case. They can appeal it. And if they want to appeal it, then we can relook at that case and see what they're appealing it for. Denied no appeal allowed means that there were issues with the case. Generally, it's because somebody, either the tenant or the landlord, were non-responsive. We weren't able to get documents from them. It could potentially have been a duplicate case. So sometimes we have a landlord and a tenant that both submit cases at the same time. So we would deny no appeal one of those so that we could review and focus on the case, just one of the cases. Your applied status is going to be that on the case info tab, you'll see that. If we look at that and it says invited or in progress under the tenant's name, they have not completed this portion. I'll show you that. I think it's on the next slide. And then in progress means the review has started. Again, we have a two-portion progress. We have an auditor and we have a supervisor. If you see something that says call outreach completed, that means that the auditor has made every attempt to either reach the landlord or the tenant, and we haven't gotten either a call back or the documents that we need. If you see it's assigned to DSHA auditor, that means you need to contact DSHA because we're going to need some additional information for that case. All right, so I don't know if you can make that a little bit bigger, Lori. It's kind of hard to see. I think I can make it. Okay. So on the left-hand side, you're going to see tabs going all the way. It says landlord info, bank info, property info, tenant. You'll see that there are yellows and blues. Those blue check marks mean that we have what we need. We're good to go on that tab. Yellow means that there's an issue that we need some additional information. And so if you look over in there's next to name over here, I guess I don't, past due rent. I mean, you can work all the way across and kind of see where your tenant's application status is, what's been paid, if it's been denied. You can see who the auditor is on this case. You can see the status. So we see at the top, we have an applied case. It's been unassigned. So this means that it was somebody applied, but it hasn't been assigned to be reviewed yet. So Lori, it's really hard for me to see the screen, but I think that's it on this one.
Yeah, and then just the column in which it talks about in progress, submitted, or not started.
Yeah, so our in progress, means that it's being worked on, that documents are still being uploaded, that it's not ready for review yet. Submitted, when you see that submitted button, that means that it's been submitted. You've done what you need to do, and now it can be reviewed. And not started means that either the tenant hasn't started the application or the landlord hasn't started the application. When the tenant applies and they put in the correct information for the landlord should get an email, and then the landlord goes in and does their portion of the application. And then when they hit the submit button, then we can review that, and vice versa. When the landlord does their portion, let's say the landlord submits an application, puts in the tenant information, the tenant will then get an email to go into the portal and do their portion. And once they hit that submit button, then we can go ahead and have that case reviewed. So our program contacts. So for general application status questions, you can contact the call center. That's on the slide here, but it's also on our website. For payment questions, if you have any sort of question regarding payments, you can contact the call center if well. If you're not able to get an answer from the call center, they will escalate it and you will get a response to that. Login password questions, call center can help with that as well. And so we have some in-house DSHA staff that work in specialty areas for cases that need a little bit more attention. We have Brenda Stevenson, and she handles all of our payment questions. So pre-Yardi, when we were working in Alita, if you have questions dating back prior to September of 2021, you can send an email to Brenda, and she should be able to tell you what's been paid out on one of your tenants. We have Brenda that also works in large property managers. So if you're a large property manager, or if you have utility questions, Brenda is your go-to for that. We have Reem Alicia, and she handles all of our court cases. So if you have somebody that you're getting ready to evict, or you have a court date coming up, Reem Alicia is the person that you can reach out to. She can escalate your case. You're going to need to upload the court documents so that she can escalate your case and get it taken care of, hopefully prior to you having to go to court. And then any other sort of program issues, you can reach out to me, and either I can take care of it or direct you to somebody else on our team. So I guess now we have some question and answer time.
Yes, thank you, Marva. That was quite a presentation. Thank you. We will now be moving into question and answer. If you have any that you would like to place in the chat or the Q&A, now is the time to do so. As you type in your questions, I will just throw in a quick plug for the next biweekly landlord call, which will take place on Thursday, July 7th at 3 p.m., and it will be via WebEx again. The registration link will be sent in the follow-up email, as well as, again, the PowerPoint that was presented today in the webinar recording. So again, if you have any questions at this time, you can feel free to place them in the chat or the Q&A box. Okay, so we have one question. I have a tenant who would like to apply for assistance and who is not behind on her rent. What should we submit?
Thanks, Lori. I think I muted myself again. So you don't have to have, the tenant does not have to be behind. You can still upload the ledger that shows that they are current on their payments. And you can also upload a letter with that ledger that basically says, as of such and such a date, this tenant is not delinquent in rent. Other than that, it's going to be the same documents. It's going to be the lease agreement, your W-9, the tenant's income documentation. So same as every other application. It's just you're not going to have a past due rent ledger. You're going to have a ledger that shows that tenant is current on their rental payments.
So we will break this one up, but it looks like how long does it take to disperse funds after an application has been submitted?
So that is a great question, and it depends on a multitude of things. So it depends on if we've gotten a complete application. If it's an application that we can get that doesn't require any documents to be requested, it's just a matter of when that case gets assigned for review. Once it's reviewed, and if it passes on the first go around, then typically that can be done rather quickly, but it really just depends on what we receive in that application.
Just waiting to see. How do we know if we need to submit additional information after submitting the application?
So you're going to get an email once the file is being audited, and the auditor will let you know if there's additional documents that are needed. You can also contact the call center, and the center can look at your application. And like I said, those tips that I said to you earlier, or we talked about earlier regarding your tenant, having some clear conversations with your tenant that they're not getting an email and they're not holding documents that need to be submitted.
Okay. How can I make sure my tenant's application connects with mine?
So great question. Again, you're going to need to make sure that your tenant is utilizing the email that you're using to work through DHAP cases. So you're going to want to make sure that your tenant has that. If the tenant has entered the incorrect address, the tenant can go in and they can correct that on their application. If they're not able to correct it on their application, they can contact the call center to walk them through that. And otherwise, you shouldn't have any other issues. If you do, you can contact me or somebody on my team, and we can help you with that process as well. But generally, that's something the call center can help the tenant with.
And is the call center 24 hours?
That's a good question. Marlena, do you know the hour? They're not? Okay.
Okay. How can I check the status of a payment?
So you should be able to go into the portal. Are you so I think I need a little bit more clarity on the question. When you say the status of a payment, is a payment that we've already made? And you're trying to I just need a little bit more detail to that question.
Yes, I think it's been approved and they're curious when will it be paid or if there's a way to track the payment.
Yeah, so you should be able to go into the portal and you'll be able to see the status of that case as it moves through. Once it's in paid status, that means that it's approved status, it's approved for payment. Paid status means that we've sent it to the bank for payment.
Okay, I do not see any other questions in the chat at this time. I'll just open it again and wait a few more seconds to see if any more come in. Okay, so I do not see any additional questions at this time. Just a reminder, we will be sending up a follow-up email that will have the recording, this PowerPoint, and a summary of the chat. If you do have additional questions, you can visit the DE COVID Housing Help website. I'll place it in the chat right now. Oops, chat. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you on the next call.